Ladakh is one of the most beautiful places you can ever travel to. It's the Himalaya region in India with gorgeous winding roads through the mountains, sparkling lakes, and the friendliest people. Because it's so remote and a landscape not many people get to experience, it's unfortunately quite easy to make some mistakes that might cause difficulties or even ruin your trip in Ladakh. I have a Ladakh travel guide video linked in the description below with more information on how to plan your trip. Having spent 3 weeks there myself, I also wanted to share some of the biggest mistakes not to make during your Ladakh trip in this video. This way, you won't make the same mistakes I did and fully get to enjoy your trip to Ladakh. To see more of my videos in the future, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. You can also find more of my videos on foreigner travel in India, linked below. I am so excited to talk about this because Ladakh was one of the most impactful places that I have ever been. So if you have the privilege to travel there, I'm going to warn you against the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 biggest mistakes not to make in Ladakh and have the best Ladakh trip ever. The first biggest mistake that a lot of people make is flying into Ladakh. I obviously understand why this happens because a flight is only a couple of hours, whereas if you're traveling overland, it's going to take you at least 3 days from Delhi. However, there are a couple of reasons why flying into Ladakh is not a good idea. First of all, Ladakh has a season, so the ticket prices will always go up and probably be more expensive than traveling to Ladakh overland, which is something on the side to think about. At the same time, there is this massive reason why traveling overland is the experience of a lifetime instead of just flying into Ladakh. The views when traveling overland are just absolutely amazing. They're just out of this world. These landscapes that I've seen traveling to Ladakh overland, they were just surreal. Constantly while I was traveling there, I just had the feeling that I was in a movie set, but it was real. But at the same time, it felt like a movie set. But it was so beautiful. Even though it is definitely a challenge traveling overland to Ladakh, I would 10/10 recommend it because that in itself is already an experience. Taking a flight anywhere will kind of be the same depending on the airline that you're flying, but traveling overland to Ladakh is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that you really shouldn't miss out on. That also brings me to the second biggest mistake that people make while traveling to Ladakh or when traveling into Ladakh. They don't really acclimatize. Ladakh is on an altitude where you can actually die if you don't acclimatize. And today is gonna be a chill day because I traveled with a bus for the last 2 days and I just need to relax and get accustomed to the altitude. I'm just a little bit dizzy once in a while and sometimes I get these, these jabs in my head. It's not a real headache, but just sometimes it's like, So you need to take it easy, take it slowly, get used to the altitude, and then we can do fun stuff. You need to take rest, you need to sleep a lot the first few days, you need to drink a lot of water, and just take rest. Coming back to my first point, when you fly into Ladakh, the chances of you getting altitude sickness, which is what happens if you don't acclimatize, are much higher because you're suddenly going from this very low altitude to this very high altitude, and it's going to be harder for your body to adapt in general. Some people are just absolutely magical. Traveling overland next to the absolutely gorgeous views also gives your body the opportunity to slowly adjust to the altitude, making the risks of altitude sickness a lot lower. So you're actually already acclimatizing while you're traveling to Ladakh. Now, I do have to mention that, the risks of altitude sickness and how much time it takes for you to acclimatize are very different from person to person. I can't even walk fast because I'm out of breath like nothing. I think it also has to do with high altitude. There's less oxygen in the air, right? And I have to also walk slow because if I do things too fast, I get dizzy. For me, even though I traveled overland and took all the precautions to acclimatize myself, it still took me a week to be able to walk normally without getting out of breath. It was very tough on my body being at that altitude. Maybe for you, it won't be that harsh. Just do realize that if you are flying into Ladakh, your risks of getting altitude sickness are higher. Getting altitude sickness sickness is absolutely no joke. My guest house owner with who I was staying, she told me that regularly people do die because of altitude sickness in Ladakh. Please, please, please take into account that you need to acclimatize, and it is not a myth. You really, really have to do it. So don't think lightly about that. By the way, in case you need more travel advice on Ladakh, I also have a travel guide and I've linked it down in the description below. Moving on to biggest mistake number 3 that I made quite a lot in Ladakh, and it is underestimating distances. Oh my goodness. I am used to long distances in India. I can easily take overnight trains. I don't mind a few hours of bus travel. I kind of find it normal, but traveling for 3 days just to get into Ladakh or getting out of Ladakh was a whole new experience for me. At times, it was very exhausting. One of the best examples that I can give you is when I went to Pangong Lake. Somebody told me that it was 6 to 8 hours of travel, and I was like, sure, that's fine. What they didn't tell me, or what they couldn't have told me, because for most people in Ladakh this is very normal, is that the road is extremely bumpy and you're still climbing up because Pangong Lake is at an even higher altitude. So that whole trip of 6 to 8 hours was so much more exhausting than, for instance, just taking a bus from Delhi to Rishikesh. Also, I think because it's like a completely new environment, you're getting so much more new experiences that you need to process. So when the distances are so long and far, you don't really get enough time to process in between of what is happening around you. If you're traveling into Ladakh, please just be mindful that the distances might be a lot longer and take you a lot more time because the roads are very windy and the road quality is not always the best. Even though they might also say that it's 6 to 8 hours, it could easily end up being 10, 12 hours if the environment is not really collaborating. Just make sure you take that into account and always take enough rest. Biggest mistake number 4. I know quite a lot of people will disagree with me on this one. Whenever I discuss this, a lot of people tell me, oh, it's fine, I did it. But I do want to share my personal experience with you because maybe you're not that type of person who will thrive well while traveling solo in Ladakh. A lot of people have done it, but for me, being in that environment and traveling around, it made me realize how dangerous it actually can be out of the blue. So if you're, for instance, taking a solo trip on a bike or even in a car, you might get in trouble if your car or your bike breaks down, or if you fall, or if you have an accident. One of the guest house guests where I was staying, he was traveling around Ladakh with his daughter. He told me about this instance where they were, just driving around. They saw a rope, along the road, which was meant to stop vehicles. So they stopped. Suddenly, 50 children came out and asked them for money and started threatening them. Luckily, this was quite a big guy, so he was not impressed or pretending to not be impressed, because what are you going to do if 50 children attack you? And it's children, so what are you gonna do? You have to take into account that Ladakh is a very remote area. Even though it is tourist season and there are a lot of people passing by, sometimes it can happen that you get stranded somewhere or get into a certain situation with, people having bad intentions and you don't have backup because you're traveling solo. That's why whenever people ask me if it's a good idea to travel solo in Ladakh, I always tell them, if you are traveling solo like I did, I would travel by public transportation. I would not take a private car, because then there would always be more people. If anything happened to me, if I got altitude sickness out of nowhere, then at least there would be other people around to help me out. If you want to take a tour around Ladakh on your motorbike or even in your car, please go in an organized group tour. I think people can sometimes very underestimate this kind of rough nature and how easily things can go wrong. For instance, also when I was in Pangong Lake, I was wondering, okay, so how far is the nearest hospital if anything happens? The distances are very, very far. If you ask me, I would never recommend anybody to travel solo in that kind of rough nature. Always have a partner with you or travel in a group tour. Which also brings me to the final mistake. This is something something that is very, very romanticized by people until you actually experience it. In Ladakh, there are very often power cuts, which means very often the Wi-Fi won't be working. Wait, look at this pumpkin soup. Oh no, the power went off. Wait. On top of that, there is no cell phone coverage in Ladakh. Traveling there by yourself, like I did, and having no cell phone coverage, and then on top of that, the Wi-Fi mostly not being available, it made me extremely insecure and panicky. Wait, before you judge me as a spoiled millennial, let me just explain why that is. I have traveled solo all over the world. I am used to not having Wi-Fi or not having cell reception. But a reality of traveling solo or even traveling in a group is that you have to let people know where you are because of safety reasons. Especially in an environment like Ladakh, it is really good to let people know where you are. So in case anything happens or if you go missing, you know, they can inform the authorities and start looking for you. Unfortunately, before I went to Ladakh, nobody had told me about this. So when I got into the situation where I was without cell phone reception for quite some weeks, I stayed for 3 weeks in Ladakh, and then also the Wi-Fi regularly not being available, it just made me feel so unsafe, so insecure that I really sometimes spent days in my room crying because I wasn't able to reach my family and my friends. Again, you're allowed to judge me as a millennial, but if you've never been in that situation where you're completely alone in a very, very remote region and not able to even, you know, discuss the day with your brother or your sibling, it's a very, very bad feeling. So if you are going, and especially if you're traveling solo, just do realize that there is no cell reception. Wi-Fi mostly will not be available, and just have that mindset beforehand. Maybe even take precautions with your family and friends on how you are going to notify them when you do have reception and how you're going to keep them posted where you are. Maybe even discuss some alarms for emergencies in case things do go wrong. How are you going to save yourself? Because if your car breaks down or your motorbike breaks down, you can't call anybody. So yeah, that is definitely something to consider, and again, not to underestimate according to my experience. If you are going to Ladakh, I hope you have the absolute best time. Experiencing all of these things is nothing to the beauty that I have seen there, so please don't let my biggest mistakes scare you from going. If you like this video, make sure to put a thumbs up. Also, if you are not yet subscribed to my channel, make sure to click the subscribe button and also the little bell icon to get the notifications whenever I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!